Welcome back to Season 2 of Trinity Western University's Innovation Series. I have 3 instructions before we all get started. First, as is our tradition, let's get to know each other by typing your name and location in the chat box. Feel free to chat throughout the session in the spirit of collaboration. Let's also welcome those joining us for the first time. Let us know who you are in the collaborative space. Second, the Q&A portal will be enabled during the talk for today's session, which will be followed by an interview with the speaker. As we move towards the interview, we will select a few questions from the Q&A section and have them discussed by our speaker. You may include your email along with your query, and if we're not able to answer your question live, we will have a response for you later on. And third, please provide feedback in our poll at the end of the session today so that we can keep improving these sessions. Welcome to the Innovation Space. My name is Sushil Rajaratnam, and I'm the project strategist of the Innovation Series, and it's my privilege to welcome you all here today. Today, stakeholders who influence an organizational success are no longer satisfied with transactional value alone. To earn true enthusiasm from their employees, leaders must make every aspect of their business a demonstration of purpose and create spaces for employee buy-in by facilitating platforms for them to communicate their ideas across culture, strategy, and brand. As organizations also open themselves up to consulting and creating creative knowledge, they start to increase the value and create the purpose, unity, and passion needed to succeed in today's social landscape. By fostering such a collaboration between sectors and teams, this results in a competitive advantage. Last segment, Dr. Led highlighted the need to accept constant change in our processes and systems and private silos, and spoke about why we need to open them up for relational cross-pollination of data sharing and interfacing of ideas. This week, we continue our theme on innovation between teams as we hear from Kevin Gilbert with the talk that conveys the need for co-creation in order to innovate. Kevin Gilbert is a facilitator, writer, and leader who helps organizations transform through listening. Through his work with Domain 7, Kevin is trusted by nonprofit organizations, universities, and governments, and known for helping lead breakthrough collaborative sessions that help bring about change. He lives on a solar-powered intergenerational family farm in Kelowna, BC, with his partner Kendra and 4 kids and 60 egg-producing chickens. And he also enjoys writing songs and telling stories that make people laugh, think, and possibly cry. It's also a great privilege to welcome Rebecca Swaim, the Executive Director of TWU Richmond, who is our guest host for today's session. Rebecca has been a part of the development of TWU Richmond from an idea back in 2014 to a campus that now operates in 2 locations with over 1,000 students. Rebecca has also lived in Shanghai, China, where she worked and studied Mandarin. She will be interviewing Kevin Gilbert after his talk. Please welcome our speaker for this evening, Kevin Gilbert from Domain 7.
Hi, folks, and thank you for having me. It is great to be here, and I'm already looking forward to the question and answer period right after this. So I hope you'll be taking lots of notes about things that are sparking your curiosity as this conversation starts, which is called A Call to Co-Creation. I am part of a team called Domain 7, and we are a group of folks in the Vancouver area that has helped people for many years navigate digital change and innovation. So we've helped people with lots of technology projects, specifically through design. And we've had the opportunity to work all around the world, in Canada and the US and in other places, in higher education and in government. And it has been an honor to be part of many of these projects. And part of the reason why I work is to support my family. I have 4 kids. That's Rosalie, Theodore, Addie, and Ben. And we have chickens. We live on a bit of a farm. And it's a blast to be working with my kids and living and playing with them. And it's really interesting to see the way they view innovation and ideas. I think of my oldest son, Benjamin. He has one idea a minute and always wants to get it done. Often these are video editing projects he wants to do, and he wants my time to help him with it. And sometimes it's not the right time to work on a video editing project. For instance, if we're trying to get out the door to go to school, that's not the time to work on a video project. Or if it's time to go to bed, that's also not a good time to work on a video project. But for Benjamin and his innovative ideas, any time is a good time. And I know how he feels. That attitude was mine too for a lot of years. One of the reasons I said yes about 10 years ago to working at Domain 7 was because of the opportunities for innovation. I got to work as a creative strategist, and we'd work on all sorts of innovative ideas. Sometimes they were storytelling projects or multimedia projects or video and audio, web design, technology projects. And sometimes they'd win awards. And it was so much fun to come up with ideas and pitch them to my clients and have them say yes, and to work on these tremendous creative accomplishments. And sometimes I would do the same thing, come up with an idea, try to motivate the client to say yes, and then they would say no. And that's a very mysterious problem to run into. Why do people sometimes say yes to your great ideas, and why do they sometimes say no? For instance, one time I wanted to help a client tell their story about what's possible for them, for the vision that they had to help them better explain their 10-year strategy. And I came up with a great concept to use storytelling and inspiration. And you know what they said? They said, we'll just upload the PDF. We'll just put the document on the internet and that will do. Well, that's a big thumbs down. That's not innovation. That's not doing anything except publishing boring charts and graphs to the internet. And I think again of my son Benjamin. This would be an example of one of the projects that we would get to do. Just a fun little camera trick. So it looks like he and his sister Addie are jumping into that mug with a little bit of editing. And a project like this, it makes a splash, it's easy, and it's fun. So for Benjamin, who wants to make a fun project like this, but his dad says no, or for me, who has a great innovative idea for a project, but a client says no, what's the difference? How do we get people to say yes? Sometimes I feel like I only have two thermometers, my level of genius and my level of persuasion. And if my genius is already high enough, I know my idea is good, then the problem must be with how I'm persuading people. I need to get better at pitching, right? That's how we'll get our innovative ideas launched. But something's wrong here. I don't think these are the only two tools we have. It's not just about our genius and our ability to communicate. Because if we ask ourselves this question, where does decision making happen? Who are we trying to persuade? Well, it would be the people in charge, the people with the money. It would be the people in power, right? Power is who we need to pitch. And here's another question. Where do ideas come from? Well, they come from people, the human beings with the creative spark to innovate, and they need to convince power. It's power and people that if we can just get those ideas persuaded to power, then we're talking. But we need to challenge these circles. Why is it the case that power is separate from people? Why are they not closer together? What would it look like to find people power for our innovation? So this is what brings me to talk about co-creation. It's because we need to learn to work together. And that's what co-create means. Together is co, and to work is to create. If we can co-create, then we have a people-powered innovation process. Instead of keeping the power over here and the people over there, we'll bring them together and we'll make ideas happen as one. So co-creation has a lot of different names. You could think of it as involving others in the act of making, or cooperative making, or collective building, or participatory design, community design, or design thinking meets relationships, or just those two simple letters, co, which means us, it means we. When I talk about co-creation, I think about the model and I think about the methods. So here's a framework that I think about when I think about the model of co-creation. If we want to solve problems the regular way, here's how we usually do it. We start with a problem and we want to get to the solution from left to right as fast as possible. But things stand in our way. There's people, there's their lists, and there's other ideas. All these things are obstacles that stand in the way of us moving from problem to solution. So we try to find ways to skirt around that. So we don't have to listen to those people, or we find the right people and the right ideas. But co-creation says, what if all these things in front of us are exactly the ingredients that we need for healthy innovation? What if we want to say yes to those people and yes to their ideas as an alternate pathway to getting to innovation? So we draw a box around them. And that box is actually two different boxes. Well, they're actually diamonds. And one is about the problem and one is about the solution. Co-creation splits them up. First, we need to spend time exploring what the problem actually is. And then we need to explore what the solution is. The reason why they're diamonds is because there's a process of diverging, which means going wide and staying open, and a process of converging, which means narrowing and choosing and deciding. And when we stay open long enough to consider new perspectives, that's where new ideas come from. That's emergence. That's where newness or innovation begins to come from. So these two distinct flows is what we want to see happen in co-creation. Listening to what the problem is until new ideas emerge, and then converging on our understanding of the problem, and then diverging widely to ideate, to imagine. So we find new ideas again, and then we can choose. And each one of these slices has a little label too. First is about discovery, where we're listening. Next is about defining, where we're naming what we learned. And next we want to develop or design or ideate. And last we want to deliver insights, deliver learning, so we know whether our ideas are worth implementing or not. We want to be starting with questions, not with a problem. We want to start with what drives our curiosity. And we want to move to a place where now we can ask a new type of question called a how might we question. How might we solve this problem by exploring these solutions? Those three letters are pretty powerful. The W stands for we, which is that co in co-creation. And the question we ask here opens us up to explore alternate possibilities. So we're not just stuck in our own head with our own idea, like my son Ben and his video editing idea, or my ideas that I want to pitch the client. We're open to what else might be possible. So we can get to a place where there's a solution that we could try. And we can go back and forth. We don't have to just see this as a linear path. We can stay in these spaces as long as we need, and we can do it together. That's what makes it co-creation, as if we're problem solving. So this is the design thinking double diamond. But when we involve the community that we're working with in the process really intimately, that's what will make it co-creative. So you can imagine behind all these things, there's activities that look like this. There's listening, there's whiteboarding, there's brainstorming, there's user testing, and those are the methods. The methods of co-creation they slot into each one of these aspects. So if we want to discover, it's about story finding and listening, or becoming a questionologist. If we want to define, it's about problem definition. That's really about reframing our understanding about how we see the problem so that we can develop or ideate. Doing a lot of working with our hands. That's sketching, that's prototyping, so that we can deliver. That's testing and failing fast, so we can get to a better understanding. And just to flash this on screen for you really briefly, each one of these categories has all sorts of different activities that take place in them. So an innovator who wants to do things co-creatively will become an expert in choosing what method to match with what part of the problem. I'd like to share a few stories of how this has happened. Both are from the District of North Vancouver, who had a bit of a problem. Town hall meetings. The same people kept showing up. They were not hearing from a diverse section of their population. They weren't listening to their community, but they wanted to. So how do you change this? Well, you can start by asking a question. You can ask a question like, how can we hear from more diverse voices in a more convenient way? If you ask that question, you could decide to hold your town hall on a weekend or in an evening, Or you could reimagine the town hall so it's not an event. You could reimagine it so it's virtual. So that's what they did. They created a whole new system called Civil Space, which became the way to do community engagement online. Works on people's smartphones and on their tablets and on their computers, runs surveys that they can access on key topics with all the right information at the right time. And they built it with us into a new standalone product called Civil Space. It now helps hundreds of communities with their decision making, all because the people at the district asked a different kind of question. They didn't just say, how do we hear from more diverse voices, and made it a scheduling question. They widened it to include more people and really get at the heart of what's possible. A lot of that thinking is captured in this book called Sprint, which lays out a 5-day method for solving problems co-creatively, where you would map out what the problem is, sketch out some solutions, decide on what you want to prototype, build out a prototype, and then test it with users. You'd actually involve people, your actual leadership doing actual designs with actual users. And again, the District of North Vancouver did that to solve one of their problems. And here's a quote from somebody from that community after the week. They said, "We often get down on ourselves, frustrated with ourselves as an organization about our silos or how fractured and apart we are. But right here, this week during the sprint, we proved that a new way of collaborating is already possible. Look at this. We're from so many teams, but we worked together. Hierarchy wasn't an issue. We explored new possibilities and it was actually fun. In future times, when we find ourselves getting glum about our ways of working, we have to remember this week." It's really neat to see people connecting with the power of co-creation and finding that it stands as a big contrast to how people normally work. And not everybody is open to that. I remember a conversation I had a few years ago with a potential client in Seattle. And as I was explaining what co-creation is and how we wanted our designers to listen to their community members to come up with new concepts, the person listening to me held up their hands and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. I get it. Y'all are gonna sit in a circle and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But at the end of the day, who's your guy that comes up with your ideas?" So he really wanted to see a command and control old model of leadership where one person with his geniusometer really high uses his ability to pitch or persuade in order to convince power to say yes to the idea. Still really unfamiliar with the idea of actually relying on the community to generate the ideas. So to a leader like that, I would ask this question: what are the consequences of leadership structures that don't co-create? If that's the culture you're going to make, what's going to happen for you? I suggest there's 5 things that are going to happen to folks if they don't embrace co-creation at the right time. The first is that we're going to see some stagnation. The status quo will continue without new ideas. The second, we'll see suffocation, where people are suffering from being unheard and unvalued. We'll see more division, more us versus them divides. We'll see more exclusion, where voices are lost and a gap grows even more between power and people. And eventually, to some degree, extinction, where we lose our ability to adapt to change. But adapting to change is what we as people need to do. That's how we grow over time. So co-creation is one of the ways that we can stay connected to what needs to emerge.
So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and again, welcome from wherever you are joining around the globe. And Kevin, thank you so much for joining us tonight as our special guest. Greatly appreciate the ideas and experiences that you shared in the presentation. And now comes the time where we get to unpack it. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. We have guests that are going to be putting in questions in the chat box. And so viewers, if you haven't already, I invite you to go ahead and type your question for Kevin. He looks forward, as he mentioned in the beginning of the program, to receiving your questions. And I had the privilege of crossing paths with Kevin not too long ago as I took part in one of those design sprints that he referenced as a tool for co-creation where teams set aside 4 to 5 days to this process. And Kevin, I imagine some in our audience heard that reference to a 5-day process and thought, are you crazy? I could not ask my team to set aside their regular work to do such a thing. I'm curious, how would you respond to them?
Great question, Rebecca. And thanks for hosting tonight. It's great to see you again. The question of could I spend 4 or 5 days just solving one problem with a group of people is great. I mean, it's important to ask questions of how we're spending our time to make sure it's spent wisely. The opposite of choosing to spend time on a problem to solve is not wasted time. It can be seen as an investment. And a couple of ways to think about it is, it can be a way to build your team. And that's a road you can travel far into the future if you plan to keep working with those humans over the next few years. The other thing it can do is really get people coherent around a common sense of vision, which again, that's a resource that you get to use in the future. But really a sprint or a co-creative session is meant for problem solving. And you could choose to dedicate 4 or 5 days to really focus on it. Or you could let it stretch out indefinitely for 6 months, for 12 months without dedicating time to it, just seeing if it'll get solved the regular way. And you might find that is slightly less effective. So the idea of just bringing people together, building the team, solving the problem in a focused way, cohering around a common vision in a defined time frame with a specific method is going to give a lot of traction to you in solving the problem and in strengthening the community that you're working with. So it's a case that can be made if there are ears willing to hear.
Great, thank you. Well, you referenced about it being that team process of coming together, and the first question that comes to us is about how to kind of cultivate the team to get there. So recognizing that it is a process of folks coming together, are there specific characteristics that you need to cultivate in your team in order to co-create?
That's a great question. I love it. A lot of co-creative processes, as Priya Parker says in The Art of Gathering, it starts with the invitation. It really begins with those first conversations you start having with people about your hopes, your intentions, your dreams, your hopes for their contribution. And a lot of co-creation really depends on the right mindsets being present. It doesn't mean that everybody has to be free of cynicism. Sometimes cynicism itself can be the ingredient you need to really solve the problem with a new angle. But in the space of design thinking, you'll often hear the word empathy brought up as a mindset to bring into co-creation. That's a really big part. So is curiosity, cultivating an atmosphere and environment of people ready to ask questions. And so too is even a trait I would call assertiveness. If you've set the table for a bit of co-construction, people do need to bring the ability to state what is working and what is not working and what's possible. And so cultivating these conditions of empathy, of curiosity, of assertiveness, of openness, and creating the conditions of even the conversations that you have that lead up to it can begin to give you the hints of a team that might be ready to try a process like this.
And what if we have a viewer that says, Kevin, totally resonated. I love the points that you said. I'm so there, but unfortunately, my management is not. How would you encourage a viewer in that situation?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay if it's not the time. Co-creation doesn't fit everywhere at all times. I sometimes think about it like this. If you already know the answer and you're the expert in it, you can go ahead and make it. You can use familiar ways to implement something. Or if you don't know the answer, but it's time for some solo research, you can do that individual exploration and experimentation. It doesn't need to involve everybody. It's really in situations where you don't know the answer and a community has a stake in where you go. That's a really valuable time to choose co-creation. So you might be in a situation where those conditions aren't true. And you can say, no pressure. We don't need to do this. And you can be released from having to force it. Because it's a good way to fracture trust, is to force co-creation when nobody needs it or wants it. So don't do it. It's not like, haha, I have a secret weapon for you. It'll fix all of your problems. Use it at all times. That's not what I'm saying. It's like when you find yourself in a spot where you need to solve a problem a different way with some focused energy with the community, this is an option. I would also say, if you're working with a team that isn't necessarily ready, you could ask yourself the question of, can you change them? And I think there's a couple different paths. One is like, are they adaptive enough to change? And do you have the patience to work with that possibility? And the answer could be like, how can you gauge that? How can you test it? How can you test your team's adaptability to change? And how can you test to see if you even have the patience to explore that? And it's okay to just recognize your limits, recognize your team's limits, and not force it if it's not the time. I have found that often the seeds for co-creation that I have planted take years for people to really come around to see that it's an option and to take it seriously. So it's a long game.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. We have a question from Richard Peachy, who asked, do you have data to back up the assertions as to what will happen if a leader doesn't embrace co-creation, or is that just an opinion?
That's great, Richard. What a lovely question. A peachy question indeed. It's an interesting list, that one, because it was sourced from a workshop that I did with a department in the Canadian government. I asked them the question, what happens when we don't co-create? And I synthesized all their answers in the sort of like qualitative survey. And those were the themes that emerged when I asked them. And it's begun to be a question I ask in every workshop. I say, what are the consequences of leadership structures that don't co-create? And I don't say anything. I let them type it in, play it out. And they think about, okay, when I saw a leader that didn't ask me my opinion, here's how I felt. When I saw a leader that was really top down, forcing their way, here's what took place. And they put words to it. And I take those answers and I make this list. And so I'm not sure if I'd call that data. It's still opinion, but it's a sort of shared snowball of an opinion. And I'd be curious to see what would happen if we did turn that into more of a database study. It's really fascinating. I will say that I recognize as I phrased that it almost sounded like a threat. Like, if you don't embrace co-creation, here's what's going to happen. Didn't mean it like that. I meant when you see cultures that are pursuing the opposite actions, you see these activities, stagnation, the suffocation of people saying like, I don't feel heard. I'm not seeing new ideas. I don't feel connected. I'm not included. I'm not thriving. And I've been inside of those organizations, and it's not pretty. And it's also not to say that when co-creation happens now, it's perfect. You'll get a totally different set of things that are also maybe not great either. So that's a picture of what can happen. I hope that helps, Richard. And thanks for the question, Rebecca.
Great. There's a question that is in regards to civil space. So Mark sent a question and said, is civil space something that can be used as a tool for strategic planning?
Absolutely, yeah. Communities use civil space for community-based planning, community-based decision-making, often for taking a situation where a team has created part of a plan, and then you want to bring it to the community to say, what do you think of this direction? So maybe that's a school district, maybe that's a government, maybe that's a church or a membership-based nonprofit. You'll use that as your means of socializing an idea co-creatively for a bit of public engagement on your path to some strategic decision-making.
Right. Next question comes from M Benze George. It says, how do you engage co-creation in a diverse organizational setting where there are distinct cultural perspectives?
Oh, beautiful question. I'd almost say like that would be why to embrace co-creation. It's because there are diverse cultural perspectives and you want to make the space for it. And there's a few different things that I would think about there. One is, how do people best think and communicate? One session I was just leading this morning with a group of people across Canada, we followed a easy practice, which is when you ask a question to a group, you don't just like have people unmute their microphones and all talk at you. You first give people time for some individual reflection on the question you've asked. People need time in their own minds to process what you've asked, to think about it. In perhaps they're translating in their minds between the language that you've spoken that is not their first language. They need time to process and think. And then we put them into pairs so they can just share their ideas with one other person having already formulated them. And then from having had a pairs discussion, move them into a breakout group to socialize that conversation a little more, and then have people not, again, unmute, but type in their responses. I give that as an example to say, can we create space for deeper processors and introverts to really reflect and think on what you're asking? Can we design a process that is actually meant to hear from diverse voices? Can we take that input and shape something meaningful as the output? We don't want this to be just a token exercise where we're saying, we care about what you think. We're doing the opposite. Like, you actually have to have a process that is going to listen and incorporate the input. And that really takes care in the design of it. And I just love that question. Yes, it's when you have a diverse culture, is that you really want to make sure you're hearing from what's there so that you can create something that reflects that unique mosaic.
That's great. It's very practical. Thank you for the concrete examples. Next question from Malavika, and the question is, we cannot consider every individual's opinion and idea while working on a project. We might take some and leave out the other ideas. How do we deal with rejecting ideas that aren't adding value to our project?
Surface the criteria so people know that you can share that decision-making criteria. So if you're in a co-creative process, you know that there will be ideas that are left on the table. What criteria are you using to leave those ideas behind? And can you share them with the people you're working with? We, at the beginning, are going to look for the ideas that can meet the following list of criteria. We need something, for example, that is a digital solution, that is low cost, and that fulfills our organization's vision, for example. The ideas that are coming up here do not fit those. Also, recognizing where decision-making authority actually lies to equip people to make those hard calls. In the sprint process, which I mentioned, as you were part of this, Rebecca, there's a role called decider to say, this person is equipped with the authority to make the decision at this point. So it's a distinct shift between, at this point, we're using co-creative energy to see what's possible, and at this point, we're beginning to narrow on that process of convergence to decide on just one pathway. So when you're working within a model and you've shown people the model that, yes, we're going wide, but we're also going to narrow, they can expect that there's going to be a time of whittling down, and you can surface what criteria you're using, involve them even in the process of helping them select what stays and what goes. So there's even a little bit of buy-in towards where you're heading.
Great. Thank you. The next question tonight is from Edinatu. And the question is, if indeed, when it comes to practicing in a hierarchical structure, we can take advantage of creativity of everyone in the group.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I understand it. Are you saying that in a hierarchy, does this create a chance to really pull out the creative energy of everybody that's there? In my view, yes, that's the hope and that's the possibility. And it's true that sometimes I've found that in hierarchical environments, some folks have trained their creativity out of themselves, where they say, that's not my job. That's not expected from me. I don't do that here. If I give that idea, it'll just get shut down. And there's some coaching and coaxing to do to sort of welcome that creative perspective back that's still there in all of us. And part of what co-creation hopes to do then is foster that creativity, though it's true that some environments make it harder than others.
Another question for some practical application is from Dr. Dolly Thomas, who says, Kevin, all that you suggested might work with smaller groups, but is this possible with large groups? The process could become unwieldy and time-consuming.
That's a great question, Dr. Dolly. I love it. Yeah, it's true that a focused sprint, like the one I've described, that particular method, you're looking for a team of somewhere like 5 to 10 people. But there are still ways to co-creatively engage larger groups too. I think of methods like online engagement, which could go wide in a survey, and you can reach thousands of people for at least one part of the process, or even some online voting tools that allow people to participate in some aspect of something more co-creative. Say if a large organization wants actually the whole organization's input, there's ways to tailor the right thing for the right moment. And even to think of like, what happens if you create multiple teams focusing on a different aspect of the project? What if co-creation becomes a way of solving problems that each team is empowered to use when it works? So maybe there's just like one meeting where one team realizes that they could use this method to do that, and they're equipped to do that. And it doesn't need to be orchestrated by the whole organization to solve the same problem, but people begin using the methods of dialogue, conversation, decision-making, design thinking, where they are. That opens up a little bit more autonomy and flexibility and freedom for problem solving at the right scale. And yeah, it's true. If you wanted to go really wide in a co-creative process, it takes some design and creativity, some good choices of tools, and really healthy involvement. It's doable, and it's done when organizations that you're part of even engage you. Sometimes you'll see the government doing this. You'll see, again, like a school district doing this, where at least you're involved in one part of the process, and you have visibility into where it's going.
Great. I feel that's a plug for participating in the poll at the end of this evening, because that's a way that everyone can take part, and that's good perspective. So thank you. Our next question is from Sridevi P. And the question is, can co-creation prove to be revolutionary in the long run? How do you think it translates into a tool for a sea of change in a workspace? And three-part question, do you think it will bring about a perspective shift in people that have varied backgrounds? So I'll start with the first one there. Can co-creation prove to be revolutionary in the long run?
Sridevi, that's beautiful. Thank you. I love that question. I think it contains the seeds of the very revolution. I think so, and I would answer it in a couple of ways. If co-creation is seen as merely a tactic or a method, like the very mechanical formula, like the one I walked through, I don't think that part has a revolution in it, actually. I think that that's a useful approach sometimes. But co-creation at its heart, like the spirit of it, is about people coming together to imagine what's possible and agreeing to move towards it. That's the revolution, because it means people from different ways of seeing things are acknowledging that each other is valuable and that they have the seeds of where the future is. That's the whole thing. Like that's when I'm in this, that's why I'm in it, is the very act of getting people to look at each other and hear each other and listen to each other. That's the revolution taking place. That's us in harmony with each other, at least for a moment. And if there's more of that happening, that's peace. That's a peace that can go quite wide in our societies. So I'm very hopeful that can take place. And I think there's a lot of depth in that question. That's the first part. I know there was two other parts.
There was, and I think we have time to take one more here. I'm going to turn to one that comes from Derek, and it says, in order to stay current in your profession, it seems that we need to stay in that mode of always co-creating. What are your thoughts on this, Kevin?
Yeah, that's great. In order to stay current, always co-creating. Yeah, I think part of staying current is staying rested, giving yourself the margin and the space to be who you are, so that as you are in spaces where co-creation is happening, you're not asleep to it. For me, staying current looks like journaling and reading myself, like cultivating my own independent space so that I have something of value for when the co-creative activities happen. I'm reading through Bill Burnett and Dave Evans' book, Designing Your Life, Rebecca heard me mention that a lot when we were working together. But they talk a lot about radical collaboration, just this idea that when we keep things close to ourselves, as if we're the ones really in charge of it all, in charge of our lives, in charge of our future, we're missing the point. It's like our lives are co-created. Our careers are co-created. They don't happen in a silo. And the more we can give ourselves to that open partnership with other people and with the forces around us, that's where that evolution and change and progress and currentness happens. So I see it as being the space you take for yourself and the ways you're opening up to collaboration and connection with others in that.
Terrific. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. There was lots to take with us and apply in our teams, and just greatly appreciate your willingness to come and share your insights with us.
Of course.
It's unfortunately time that we have to wrap up, though, so we look forward to hearing more interaction with you perhaps at another point. And thank you again for joining us, and thank our viewers for the questions that you've sent in. And at this point, I'm going to welcome back Sushil to close our evening.
Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate your questions.
Our thanks to Kevin and Rebecca for that fun and edifying discussion. We hope you all were able to derive some inspiration to co-create with your teams and identify pressing problems and design solutions towards them by leveraging the strategic tools shared by Kevin in his insightful discussion. We invite our international partners to collaborate and share some areas you would like for us to innovate along with you. As transformational servant leaders, we avoid the pitfalls of cognitive bias by tapping into diverse perspectives. Notably, this type of diversity is not confined to gender, race, or sexuality, but extends to diversity of thought, background, education, and even job level. Such diversity can help organizations make better decisions because it triggers more creative information processing, which is often absent in homogeneous groups. The power of co-creation lies with each of us. As we apply the courage to convey our ideas and thoughts, we get to interface and build bridges between teams and sectors, thereby increasing organizational performance through knowledge sharing in this environment of relentless disruption. Through collaborative initiatives, we can start to assess areas where we learn through innovation and innovate through learning. As individuals bring in their skills, they influence teams to iterate and innovate through inclusion. These innovative teams will function as catalysts for employees to gain new skills that can unravel their own purpose within the organization and thereby adding to their significance and identity. It's been a privilege to host you for the second episode of the Innovation Series. Thanks for your great questions and shaping the Q&A into the conversation that brought about new ideas. We value your feedback and are intentional about incorporating them for each session. For those who are students joining us for this session, we will send out certificates to recognize your participation here today. We will be sending you personalized emails with the invitation, which will have the registration link for our next line of speakers. Registrations are now open for our next speaker, Dr. George M Benze, Director of International Engagement Africa, and Stream Director of the MA Leadership Business Program at Trinity Western University. He also serves as Public and Foreign Policy Analyst. Dr. M Benze will speak on October 28th on the topic, We Are Global, How Innovative Thinking Has Welcomed the World to TWU. He will be hosted by our own Dr. Phil Laird. It's going to be another great session, and we look forward to your great questions and participation there. We encourage aspiring leaders, designers, entrepreneurs, business owners, and our international partners to sign up, as our virtual seats are limited. And stay tuned to our YouTube channel for the promos on the upcoming talks, and please subscribe to our channel. Signing off for episode 2 of season 2, this is Sushil Rajaratnam. Good evening and good night.